I can kind of tap and drag my way through this, and you can then see All right, people, let's get into it. I am Garrett, and today we are looking at a fairly atypical camera for narrative filmmakers. Generally, when we're looking at cameras for filmmaking, things like the resolution, the sensor size, the bit depth and bit rate, log, there's a lot of really important features that go into it because we're shooting something for cinema, whether it's a short film, a TV show, feature film, music video, whatever. Today's camera is very different. This is the Insta360 One-R, and as the name would imply, it is a 360 camera. Now, I am not one who typically goes and does crazy action sports or, does wild VFX stuff. Most of the work that I do is very commercial or narrative in nature, meaning that, it's shooting things that are traditionally considered to be cinematic, which 360 isn't generally kind of put in that ballpark. Which then leads to the question of why would I want a camera like this? And the reason's actually quite simple. Every production that I run, I have a behind-the-scenes crew filming the process of how I produce certain things. It gives me content for this channel. It helps me build case studies for proposals for other clients to show how we go about doing the work. But obviously, as the world is right now, I'm not running big crews. I'm not hiring production companies to just do BTS work. Most of the time, it's just me now, or me and a couple of other key people that I need in order to finish up production. And that is where something like this comes in, because by the nature of a 360 camera, I don't have to worry about getting the camera in the right place for the right angles for a given thing. I can place a camera in my space, push record, and then go about doing the work that I'm there to do, knowing that this camera is going to capture that footage. Fantastic cinematographer Chris V does most of his work with the Phantom camera, so he's doing all sorts of really cool slow motion stuff. You should follow him on Instagram if you don't already. But Chris uses one of these cameras as an on-camera camera. So this camera gets mounted on top of the camera that he normally shoots with, and he gets these really cool behind-the-scenes shots of the cool robot arm, VFX, heavy, slow-mo stuff that he does. It's fantastic. But even if you're not doing stuff like that, having a camera like this makes breaking things down or showing things visually really, really simple. I'll give you an example. I just finished production on my first filmmaking camera masterclass. This is a thing that obviously I'll make available to you guys before it then goes out to the rest of the public. If you want to know more about that, I'll put a link below so you can kind of sign up to know when that's coming out and discount codes and all of that stuff. But in filming that, because of the world that we're in, I was by myself. And when shooting something by yourself, you have to wear all the hats. You're doing the audio, you're doing the cameras, you're doing all the stuff. It's crazy. But having a camera like this set up in the space and just recording while I'm doing what I'm doing makes it so that way I can show you guys exactly how I went about doing those things and breaking that stuff down. When you look at it, it looks an awful lot like a GoPro, but when you take it out of this case that it has here, it's actually quite peculiar. It is an entirely modular design, meaning that everything in it comes apart. So this red piece on the bottom detaches like this, and this is the battery. This thing here is the brain. So this has your touch screen here, your record and power buttons there, your receivers. This is where you put your cards or your USB Type-C port. All of that's there. And then these are the lenses here. The thing that's interesting about this, because it's so modular, they make all sorts of different configurations for it. For example, like this is a different battery case or battery brick than this thing. And when you use it like this, you can then take the brain, pop this little guy off here like this, attach this guy there, and then put the lenses on top like that. And now you have something that's more similar to its predecessor in the tall vertical 360, and then there's this case here. The other thing that's really nice about the fact that it is as modular as it is, like this, is that there are multiple lenses for this. So you can order this camera in different lens configurations. My only complaint is that they don't send little covers for these pins here on the camera modules. So I generally will like put some Scotch tape or something over this and then just be really careful with how I use it, just because there's no cover. So I wish that there was a cover for this. But for instance, this is just a standard wide angle lens, something much more similar to what you would see on the GoPro. And they also have a 1-inch sensor lens that they configured with Leica. It's pretty unreal, the different lens configurations that they have. But the fact that it's all modular, whether it's the batteries or the lenses, and it's all run by this little brain, you can configure this camera however you want in any configuration that makes the most sense for you. And then in addition to that, they have all sorts of accessories, things that you can like mount this camera onto drones. You can put it underwater housings on it and take it underwater and do all sorts of action cam type stuff with it. It has these two little shields, I guess, these little like lens covers here that you can attach over the 360 lenses if you're like gonna be somewhere where you don't want stuff flinging up onto the lenses themselves. A lot of different configurations for it. For me and my purposes, generally the standard configuration is the one that I would use the most, and it's quite simple to put together. You just attach the lens and the brain together, and then from there you just take the battery and attach it like that, and then you have this camera here. And even with its modularity like this, this camera in its current configuration, once I put this little door back on, is fully waterproof up to, I don't know, 3 meters or something. So it is a waterproof camera in the same way that a GoPro is, even though it is this modular configuration, which I think is so wild. So I'm gonna put this guy back in here. It can do quite a lot. So now that I've kind of explained how I use this thing, or how I'm going to be using this thing, let's actually dive into it. I want to show you the studio setup that I have right now because it is kind of weird. As many of you know, I teach at a film school. So when I'm not making videos here or working on film sets, I'm actually teaching film in the classroom. But because of course the world is insane right now, my entire class has to be taught online. So I had to then convert this YouTube studio into something that also works as a live streaming studio, so that way I can then teach these film classes in an online setting. And I figured that this would be a really good way to showcase kind of how some of the functions of this little product work. Now, this thing has a lot of features built into it. You can pair your AirPods to this, so that way you can get kind of clean audio from your AirPods directly into it. You have a whole host of different video calibration settings, whether you want to shoot it in log or not, you know, shooting it in standard, that kind of stuff. This has a 5.7K resolution in the total 360, and it defaults to 30 frames per second, which of course you can adjust should you need to, but it is a pretty incredible piece of hardware. So I want to kind of give you a demo of this live streaming studio that I have and use the 360 to showcase how that looks. On my left, you'll see I have one light. This is the Aperture 300D Mark I set to 60%, and I have a Westcott Beauty Dish shining light on me there. Above me directly, I have the G85 from Panasonic. That is my overhead camera. I have the Rode Video Micro. That's just to capture better reference audio. I was having a hard time syncing the audio just with the camera being used as a top-down camera. In front of me, as you can see here, is the shotgun microphone. That is the Rode NTG3 Black. I have my head-on camera, which is the GH5S. That's what's recording my main camera. Above that, I have the small HD focus monitor. That actually is the live streaming monitor, which showcases exactly what camera I am on. Moving over here to the right, you can see this crazy stack of cameras here. So I have two 7-inch monitors, one for each of my reference frames, one of course being the overhead and the other being my head-on. This is just to make sure that I have everything in frame and everything in focus for a given shot. Below that, you'll see the A10 Mini. This is my live switcher for my live streaming. I have up to 4 different channels that I can switch between. So I have my 2 head-on cameras. I'll have my laptop plugged into it, so then I can showcase like sample videos and things like that to give examples to my students or critique their work. And then the 4th channel is what I would use to demo camera functions. So I would plug in another camera that they could then see, and I can walk them through all of those types of menus. Below that, I have the H6, which is the Zoom field audio recorder. That's what I use to obviously record the audio, and then also use that as an audio interface, so then that way in my Zoom meetings with my students, my audio sounds better than, you know, a potato, which is what most of them sound like. Next to that, I have my other light. This is kind of what I would consider to be my key light. This is the Aperture 300D, also set to 60%. As you can tell, the lighting's a little overkill, but I have an impact wide beauty dish. I believe that's either a 27 or 32 inch beauty dish on there. And then right behind me is just a wall that I painted gray, and that's what gives me the background. So now that's the video mode. This also has a photo mode as well as a time-lapse mode. The time-lapse mode is obviously exactly what you would think about, but it is taking the time-lapse in a 360 format, which I can then keyframe and move around later, depending on how I want to do it. There is a companion app to this for iOS and Android, so and it works flawlessly. Understandably, this camera does a lot more than just shoot 360 videos for behind the scenes stuff. It does quite a lot, and in fact you can add effects and do all sorts of cool things, and that's all done in their app. So if I power this on like that, and I go to the app here, which is the Insta360 app, and I open this up, it looks something like this. Because I have already connected this before, it is automatically going to find the network that this is emitting and ask if I want to join. I will join. It's then going to pair those two, and then we have our home page here. So there are a couple of things that I kind of want to highlight about this that are really cool. One, you can access footage that you've shot on the device, and then you can import it into the phone, export it, add stuff to it, and then upload it to Instagram without ever having to leave the phone, which is really, really cool. Now, you're not getting the highest quality video out of it because, of course, it's sending it over Wi-Fi, it's compressing it in the phone, and then it's exporting it. But if you're just doing stuff for like Instagram stories or Instagram posts, it's totally, totally worth it. The other thing that I think is really interesting here is the shot lab. So there's kind of a whole social component to this where you can follow people and see the posts that they're doing, whether it's, you know, video stuff, photo stuff, interesting 360 stuff. See, here's some BTS stuff right here, where you can get inspiration from other people, and I think that that's cool. The other thing, though, over here is they have this shot lab. And the shot lab, while it's not necessarily something that I would use for my purposes, if you want to do really interesting, cool, creative stuff, it gives you all of the tools and tricks on how to do it directly within the phone. So again, you could shoot 360 video on the device, bring it over to your phone here, and then add all sorts of effects, whether you're doing stop motion, the clone trailing thing, which is something that's really popular right now, flash dashing, and then little creative tricks like yo-yo shots, fake drone flyaways, all sorts of stuff. So this shows you how to do all of that and how to apply those effects to that footage, which I think makes this a really, really cool Instagram, TikTok type of device. But then even in the app here, once we're in the app, it's going to then give me a preview of everything that is going on in the camera and access to the settings therein. So here you can see that I am looking at the studio here, but I can kind of tap and drag my way through this, and you can then see kind of the way that my studio is set up. I can kind of pinch to zoom in to kind of see different parts of my shots like this. It's really, really, really interesting. I can also switch between photo and video mode to take high resolution stills versus the video function. But then I also have control of my settings. So if I tap this little settings button here, I can set which version I want. So I have full manual control if I want. So then I can adjust my ISO down. So in this case, we'll go down to 100 here. I can adjust my shutter speed. So we're shooting at 30 frames, so 1/60, and then of course I can set my white balance. So I can have a whole lot of manual control of this device, even though it's in kind of this really, really simple format, which I think is pretty cool. I also can do time lapse. This thing can shoot in log, so if I want to grade this and color grade and match to other footage, like if I'm shooting more traditional BTS stuff, I can then do that with that log setting to kind of stretch that color grading farther. Battery life settings, all of that stuff is all in here, and while it is a little simple, it works really, really well. The other thing is down here in this corner here, you can see other things that you have shot that I have access to. So this here is a time lapse that I filmed when I was working on my master class here. But again, you can see here that in here, I can, even while this thing is playing, I can adjust the framing of these shots, and I kind of like scrub back and work through it. I can change the aspect ratios, like from 1:1 to 235 to 9:16 to 16:9. So depending on what I'm exporting it to, I can adjust all of that stuff right in here. I can trim it, adjust the speed, add music, add filters, adjust. There's so much control here that even just within the phone, by having my phone connected to my device, I can get a lot out of this for social media, which is kind of where I would see this working more specifically. In this newest firmware update that they just came out with, they've done a couple of things with the firmware, both in the camera and in the app, that I think are really worth noting, even though, you know, this camera is 6 months old. And again, that just speaks to Insta360's dedication to the camera platform, that at any point in time, they can come out with new modules, whether they're new lenses or new batteries or even new brains, to where they can take this platform and expand it both from a hardware perspective, but also a software perspective. One of the things that they have added in the new firmware, which is fantastic, is for photos, and it is an AI-driven shooting mode called Pure Shot. And somehow, magically, it enhances the dynamic range of your shot and preserves more image clarity and detail than before. To shoot HDR photos before, you would have to, and this was true of all cameras, you would have to do what is called exposure bracketing, where you would take a photo at varying exposures and then after the fact combine all of those photos to get the highlights from the lower exposed shots and the shadow detail from the higher exposed shots to get an HDR image. And this somehow does it all within one exposure, which is pretty unheard of and pretty awesome. In terms of video, they've done a couple of cool things as well. They've increased the bit rate that this records at, meaning that you're going to get more accurate color rendering, you're going to get better sharpness and detail quality than you did before, which is a pretty incredible engineering feat. They've created a new standard color profile that you would be shooting this in, which is more vivid, bright, and vibrant. There's still a traditional standard as well as log, so if you're somebody like me who wants to do color grading after the fact, this does have native log in it. They've also introduced webcam functionality to this camera, so if you're somebody who's working at home, like many of us are, and you don't have a giant studio setup like this, but you want something that's better than obviously what your computer does, because the computer webcams are all terrible, this can be utilized for that, and that's where something like this lens here, which is the 4K wide lens, and they even have one that they engineered along with Leica, which is a 1-inch sensor lens. I really want to get that lens. That lens looks awesome, but both of those lenses would be fantastic for that, giving you a very, very nice, pleasing image in a webcam form without, of course, needing an entire studio setup to do it. So that's really sweet. We were talking about the fact that this can go underwater, and one of the things about it that they have updated is that in the app on the smart device or on the computer, you now can tell it that you shot it underwater, and it is going to go through and, with their AI-driven technology, shift all of the colors so that we don't get that weird offset underwater color look where there's like no red like available at all. They've figured out how to go through and make all of the colors look the way that they're supposed to look, so you don't then have to go through and try to color correct for the fact that you're shooting underwater, which is pretty unreal, because if you're able to shoot underwater and then get true color rendering after the fact, you don't have to do any work to make all of that underwater footage look incredible. They've gone and improved the wind reduction in the camera itself, so even if you're not using an AirPod to get your audio, you'd still get better audio now than you would when it first came out. The other thing that's really kind of interesting that I haven't done with this camera that I would be curious curious to test out is the audio control. There is voice control for this device through your AirPods. So if you do have the camera mounted in some precarious position, far away from you or just on the selfie stick, you actually have voice control over this. So you can tell it to record or tell it to stop recording or what have you, just with the sound of your voice, which again, for my use case, I don't know how often I would use it, but if I was somebody who was doing like traditional content creation where I'm doing really cool and interesting things with a 360 camera, that might be a really, really handy tool to have. One of the things that I'm curious about, and comment down below if this is something you'd be interested in, this camera now supports live streaming. So theoretically, I could set this up in the middle of a set, have a 360 view, and I could then kind of just leave it and forget it and stream this. So that way there would be a live stream to where you could click and drag and view yourself through the scene and see exactly what it is that we're doing. If you want to see something like that, let me know. I don't know if that's something anybody'd be interested in, but that would be something that would be kind of fun to do, is to give people the ability to kind of sit in on a set to see how it works. While feeling like you're there. Now, when you're shooting with this lens or the Leica 1-inch sensor lens, the camera will then switch from shooting the Insta360 proprietary format to filming in MP4, giving you, of course, a lot more flexibility in post without having to convert a whole bunch of files from one thing to another, which unlocks a whole lot of flexibility for content creators who might be using this as their utility camera. It's their vlogging camera, it's their B-roll camera, you know, their 360 camera. It does all of those things, and that's one of the cool things about it, is that it can be the camera that does everything for you. But if you're using this lens module or you're using the Leica 1-inch sensor lens module, both of those will automatically in camera convert to shooting MP4 as opposed to the Insta360. The other cool thing about shooting with this lens or with the Leica lens is that you have the option of basic stabilization or pro stabilization. Basic stabilization is going to be kind of your basic out-of-the-box image stabilization, which is just going to smooth out any rough micro vibrations or movements that you might have in your motion. Nothing else is needed. It just does that automatically. It's in your footage and you're done. But Pro is this flow state stabilization, which gives almost gimbal-like movement to your shots and unlocks higher resolutions and higher frame rates with some post-work required on it. Either way, you get really, really smooth footage out of something that you don't necessarily have to baby, because the nice thing about having an all-in-one camera like that, if you're going to use it as your all-in-one camera for vlogging, for B-roll, and for 360 content, is that you don't then have to worry about a whole bunch of accessories and rigging for it, because of course they all come with it. Okay, so a quick outfit change and then we're moving on. If you want to get the most out of your footage in terms of quality, you really should use the desktop app. So we would take the micro SD card out and plug it into the computer, offload that, and then work in the app. Now, there is a standalone application, the Insta360 Studio app, and then they have a plugin for Premiere. I like just using the Insta360 Studio apps. This is going to give you the widest dynamic range, the most customization within your footage, and then you can even export it as ProRes 422 to get the most image quality out of it. So if you're going to use this like how I do for a BTS camera, it makes the most sense to go into the studio and do it that way with the computer app. But if you're just doing stuff for the gram and you want to get stuff that's kind of really cool and interesting and post it right away, you can do it just with the connection between the two, which I think is pretty awesome. I think that mounting this on a camera and using it as a camera on camera BTS camera, wow, that was a lot of words, is one of the coolest applications for this if you are a narrative filmmaker or you just want to show cool behind the scenes of the stuff that you're doing, which if you're anything like me, you always do. The couple things to keep in mind, obviously because this is a 360 camera, the closer you get to it with the barrel distortion effect of it being 360, the more distorted things are going to be. The further away you are from the lens, the more normal everything is going to seem. And the nice thing is that with this invisible selfie stick here, you actually get a fair amount of distance away from it. Again, in order to keep the selfie stick invisible like the name implies, the camera needs to stay parallel with the selfie stick itself. But because you're shooting it in 360, you actually don't have to worry about tilting the camera up to catch yourself. You can just hold it out exactly like this and it's still gonna see you perfectly. The other thing to keep in mind when using a 360 camera is that it is automatically stitching the two lenses together. So the footage that one lens is shooting is then stitched along the same seam as what the other lens is capturing. This camera, of the 360 cameras that I have used, does absolutely the best job with the stitching, keeping it as seamless as possible. But if you look at the fine details, you'll kind of see a little bit of where the two cameras don't necessarily line up perfectly. So when you put this camera in an environment to capture your 360, it's important to note that you have your lenses facing in a direction where the most important things aren't going to be along the seams. The other thing to keep in mind is that because these lenses do protrude like this, you want to make sure that you're careful not to set it down on anything without the provided lens covers, because you don't obviously want to scratch your lens. The other thing I feel that's important to note here, I'll turn this back on, is that there is this little screen here, which you can access all of your menu settings, all your camera settings and everything right off of this, which is really, really helpful. The other cool thing though about it is that you can tap and kind of drag around like this, so you can see exactly how the 360 is functioning in any given direction. So if you want to check your seams or you want to check your light sources and make sure that you're not getting anything weird along those seams, you can do that directly here on the display without even necessarily having to have your phone connected to it, which I think makes this really interesting because, again, if I'm using this as a BTS camera, goodbye, or a behind the scenes camera, I'm not gonna be pulling out my phone all of the time to make sure that, I'm capturing all of the right stuff. But being able to just kind of swipe through that screen keeps it really, really, really simple. Now at $440, this camera is not cheap, which brings the question up of who is this camera for? I think that this is the perfect companion camera for any content creator. Whether you're a musician working in a home studio, a photographer that's out in the field, a videographer that's on set, this camera essentially gives you a second shooter. This camera gives you another angle, a shot that you can be in where you can demonstrate the work that you are doing. And it's the only camera that I know of in this price point at this budget that does it as well as this camera does. So is it an investment? Yes. But if you're the type of creator who wants to show people how things are done, I don't think you'll find an easier solution. If you shoot with 360 cameras, I'd like to know which ones you shoot with and what you shoot them for and the stuff that you get out of them. I'm fascinated by this technology and I feel like I'm only scratching the surface by using it as a BTS cam. So if you use it for other applications, let me know. I'm really curious. I hope you found this video helpful, and if not helpful, at least interesting. If you liked it, do me a favor, give this video a like. If you want to see more stuff like this, hit subscribe and the notification icon. And as always, I'll see you in the next episode.